And we're behind schedule here, and we got some. I know people want to hear this panel. Thank you. I'm Rick Kessler. I am now found myself as the president of the board of the Pipeline Safety Trust, and I have the distinct honor to moderate this panel and thankfully not present on this panel, though I've kind of been involved with integrity management, starting with the 2002 Pipeline Safety Act, which I've worked on with a number of people in the room. That act was a big collaborative step forward, tough to get to the ultimate product, but ultimately a product I think everybody, all the stakeholders thought was a good one. And so here we are 10 years down the line, and we've got some people who deal with this every day and have for the better part of that 10 years to talk about basically what we've learned, where the gaps are, what we could be doing better, what we're doing well now. So without our panelists, let me introduce them. First, I'm only looking because I don't ever remember everyone's titles. I don't even remember my own title half the time. But, of course, first we have Andy Drake with Spectra, and he is the Vice President of Asset Integrity. He'll be followed by Larry Shelton, the Manager of Asset Integrity for Sunoco, and, of course, Jeff Weiss, the Associate Administrator of PHMSA. So without any further ado, I'm going to get Andy up here. I think this is loaded. So
I think it's loaded. Thanks, Rick. This is a great venue. I think what we find here is we sit down and talk with one another. I remember 10 or so many years ago, 7 years ago, it seemed like, we sat here and it was a very polar group. There was the public group, there was the pipeline group, and there was the regulator group, and they were very separated by one another. I think in so many years we have now bridged some of that gap a little bit. But we find ourselves with a common goal here, but maybe a little bit different perspective on how to get there. I think things like the collaboration and these kind of venues like this foster better communication between us and help us learn and figure out how to improve. And I think that's really what we're trying to embrace here. When Carl asked me to talk on this, he said, don't worry, just come up and focus on what we've learned over the last 10 years and try to help us identify an action plan on where we should go forward, what needs to be changed. I said, oh, okay, and how long do you want to talk? He said, 15 minutes. I said, oh, okay, I think I got it. I think really, in all sense of it, we'll try to move through this pretty quickly, but just to back up and look, where were we 10 years ago when Rick talked about the Pipeline Safety Act 2002? What was going on around us at that time? Well, third-party damage was our #1 threat. It was quite pressing. We had no national one-call systems. We had no damage prevention programs in the nation. Corrosion, internal and external, or external and internal, were #2 and #3 on the threat profile list. We took an integrated kind of risk-based approach, which was very new for us in an explicit approach anyway, to looking at integrity management, a way to step our game up, so to speak. We went through a very pragmatic approach of trying to develop technical criteria on what is the threats and what do you do and how do the tools work and when do you use them and what do you repair and when do you come back and all those very pragmatic things. We focused it on high consequence areas. So it started in high consequence areas. It was intended to look at all the threats, and we broached a discussion about programmatic elements. It certainly wasn't the emphasized syllable, so to speak, in that sentence, but it was an effort to try to get people thinking about metrics and continuous improvement and how do you manage change and those kind of things, but not probably what any of us were really great at. By the way, most of us were engineers, and so we took a very pragmatic approach. And it was kind of interesting that all this neat esoteric stuff was going on over here, but we were very focused on let's get to the tools, let's get running the tools, let's go fix stuff and move on. So what happened? I think, well, we focused a lot of energy on third-party damage, and it seemed to pay off. We put national one-call systems into place. We put all these damage prevention programs around, and we've seen huge changes in awareness and statistics. Those are both good things. I think we've also kind of seen that inline inspection tools actually are very good at finding corrosion. That was an emotional issue 10 years ago. I think it's now a very pragmatic issue. That's exactly what they do. They're great at it. The more often you can get those tools in there and find those things, the very much more confident you are about your status against that threat. So, what has been happening over the last 10 years? Well, here's some more data. We're good at data. All these pragmatic people get together. They gin up all this technical stuff. 10 years ago, 40% piggable. Currently, about twice that. That's good. That's good to know. It's almost 100% increase, and it's good to see that technology is being more accessible into the pipelines. We're changing the infrastructure. Over the time, I think we've seen about 95,000 miles inspected to address 9,500 miles of HCAs. That's about 10 to 1. That's good data. That's good to know. Over the last 10 years, there's been about 11,000, 12,000 anomalies repaired or removed from the pipeline. That's good, too. That's all good progress. I mean, you're making some kind of headway. Those are just good metrics to put in the back of your head. It doesn't mean everything's going to be great, but you're making progress. You're doing good stuff. What else did we do in the last 10 years? Oops. We had some problems. Despite all these efforts that we put in and all this progress, we had some very significant incidents happen. I included, the Gulf spill. Although it's not a pipeline incident, it was an energy incident. And I think they all worked together to really compromise the confidence and the trust that many of the other stakeholders had about the industry and the regulators. And as someone said earlier, the public depends on both of those entities to be diligent and forthright and execute to protect them. And when these kind of things happen and people are surprised or not in the loop, that leads to huge confidence drops. The fact that they happened in HCAs for a large part really compounded the confidence implosion, in my opinion. And I think it also helped us understand what we're doing. Although we've made all these great progress and all these great charts and all these great bars and trends, it's not enough. And it's much more than pigging. Pigs are great, but as we heard earlier, Dr. Rosenkind, there's no magic bullet. There's no silver bullet. There isn't something we're going to stick in the pipe and it's going to heal everything. We'd like it to be that easy because we got a million other things to work on, and we don't have time to get into the details of it. If we could figure out something we could throw at this and be done with it, it'd be awesome because I got all this other stuff to do. I have some bad news. It's very complex, and it's going to take a while to figure it out. There's a host of threats and a host of tools. There isn't one of anything. I think what happened in the wake of the gas pipeline incident in San Bruno, it actually is not the San Bruno incident. Okay, the city did not decide to have an event. This is the gas pipelines incident, is a failure of this industry to execute against that trust, and we need to own that. In the wake of that incident, the INGA board sat down 2 years ago and started vetting out what is working for us and what is not. Long before the NTSB's failure report came out, trying to look at what do we need to do to prevent these things from happening. We looked at other industries. I think someone alluded to, I think it was Pete alluded to that. We looked at other industries that shared a very similar fingerprint to ours. Very low frequency events that are highly unacceptable, and they affect the public. Industries like the nuclear industry, industries like the medical industry, industries like the airline industry, industries like the chemical industry. The reason we picked them to look at them is over the last 15, 20 years, we've seen huge step changes in their performance, and something was happening there. When we looked at them, we saw some key common elements in their programs and their approaches that they were using that we were not using as our emphasized syllable. And what really we saw, and we've heard it a little bit earlier, was this zero mindset. And I know we kind of, we get caught up in it. It sounds like we're going to have a little, buzzword bingo thing go on. Someone's going to go out with a white horse and a big banner and ride around with a big zero on there, and there's going to be a bunch of big posters with colorful, flashy stuff. That's interesting stuff, but that's not what this is about. This is about changing your mindset. Someone asked why. I heard all the whys when we broached this with the board. Why would we throw that out there? It's an unobtainium goal. Why would you do that? It's because it changes the way you think. And that's fundamentally what you've got to get going on here. We have to stop thinking about this has got one thing we're going to do, and then we're going to be done, so we can move on to something else. It isn't going to be that easy, and we're going to have to own the fact that it's going to be iterative, it's going to be continual, there's no stopping, and we're going to have to gear ourselves up to deal with that, work with that, and make that work for us. I think that some of the things that we saw that we've tried to put into this guiding principle set was some of those elements that we saw working for them. An application of risk management on a system-wide basis. We applied it in HCAs the last 10 years. We saw some good things happening. We need to extend that to the other parts of the system. We need to improve risk management, how it's done in HCAs and outside HCAs. I think we need to look for opportunities fundamentally to improve and stop rationalizing why we're good enough. That's sort of like leading with your chin. It's not something someone wants to hear after their house is burned down. Well, we're safer than bee stings. It's like, really? That's interesting. My house is missing. And constantly driving yourself to learn. How do you find those opportunities? How do you create them? And I think fundamentally in that learning model, how do we involve other stakeholders more aggressively to get their insights, to help us vet out these issues so that we can make more sustainable solutions? Solutions that everybody understands. You're on a trail that I agree is the right logical trajectory based on priorities and the next best choice. I think what it required us to do was actually step into the space of not banners and flags and posters, but commitments. What are we going to do physically? And if you've seen the INGA commitments, great. If you haven't, they're actually attached to this presentation, and Carl's got the presentation. I'm glad to make it available to you. It goes through all of the commitments very physically, very clearly. What else did we learn? I think on a fundamental basis, we learned zero is about a process. Unfortunately, we're project people. That's a bad thing. Project people are awesome. I've been a project person most of my life. Projects have beginnings and ends, and we'd like to think we're going to do something and then be done. The problem is that doesn't work like that in a process. Processes go round and round and round. It's about constantly improving and driving yourself forward, upward in a very systematic, logical basis. It's about, trying to figure out how, in the recent past, I think we focused very much on a prescriptive approach, of very pragmatic activities. If we do this, do this, do this, do this, we're going to be fine, we can get out of here. Everybody's happy, we've blessed it, everybody's good, I'm done. I think what we're starting to see is that's just a piece of the equation. It's not bad. It has gotten us to great levels of performance, the kind of performance most countries are very envious of. But that's not the end of the expectation of the stakeholders around us. We have to go past that. And I think, how do you do that? Now you're in kind of new water, so to speak. You got to figure out how to do this. It's all a new game, so to speak, at least to this industry. One of the things that we heard, I think, the NTSB is very keen on, by the way, think about where did the NTSB members come from? 1, 2, 3. Almost all of them come from the airline industry. They all went through that step change on process safety management and safety management systems being applied into that industry. So this is to them like the back of their hand. And you heard Dr. Rosenheim going through it. It's about data. It's about data analysis. It's about transparency. To them, that's how easy and logical this is. We're at the very beginning of that, where they were 10 or 15 years ago. But data is a big deal, and how it can be used and the accuracy of that data is a big deal. Even the old records, not even, especially the old records. Then the information has to be converted into, that data has to be converted into information with great care. Because that choice, that activity right there is going to drive the conclusions that you make about your performance and define your next choices. So if we're in a real hurry to make decisions, but we're not using great care in that analysis, all of a sudden you make some really off-ramp decisions and end up in some very strange places that aren't doing what you want them to do. And that, I think, is a warning to all of us. I'll show you an example of that. You know, Carl cited this statistic earlier, and I've had many people ask me this. I've had actually people come up to me and go, risk management is clearly not working. We need to stop doing it because, look, we've done it for 10 years and things are getting worse. It's like, well, that's a pretty good challenge. I think we need to dive into that and see what's going on. Well, let's take the constituents of that number apart for a second. One of the constituents is the red line is property damage, of which one of the biggest contributors is the cost of gas. Up until a year ago, this was the reporting criteria. That is interesting, but you're starting to trend all kind of other variables. But if you break down impacts to people, the blue line, it's very different looking. Now, I'm not trying to say things are better, let's get over and move on. It's just slow down before we decide to jettison risk management and look at the data very, very carefully. And that's going to take us coming together to do that. If I do it in a little closet and tell you, don't worry, everything's fine, there's no trust for that because there's no insight, no transparency in how that conclusion was reached. And you may have a lot of other perspectives we need to put into this to draw that conclusion. I'm not trying to draw a conclusion here other than it's not readily apparent. You can quickly grab up stats. I heard a story a long time ago. Jeff probably remembers this. A fellow said, how do we use data? Is it like the drunk uses the light pole in a dark night? Because it's a great question. Do you use it to stabilize yourself in an unwobbly, kind of a wobbly position, or do you use it for illumination? That's an incredible question. I thought about that over many years. I think a lot of times we've used data to help justify what we think we want to do, but we're not really using it for illumination, because if we were, we'd stop and ask a lot of other people what they thought about it. Just fundamentally very different. So I think that's one of the things that will help us to look at, you know, as we go forward. I think, what other things did we learn? You know, I think we've learned a lot of things about the pragmatic issues that we can address and work on to improve in the 2.0 version, as you said. I think that's a logical, iterative approach. But I think the most significant things that we can look at is really this bottom slide we've heard a lot about. That was one of the things that was really common in these other industries, these management systems, safety management systems, if you will. PSM and OSHA is a safety management system. Some of these industries are really sophisticated in how they're using that. And I think a lot of times we hear people talk about, well, we want to use this, and the unsounded syllable is that we're going to use this in lieu of the prescriptive approach. No, I think what you're talking about is using this and the prescriptive approach. You need them both. That's how you'll make the step change. It isn't jettisoning what's been working for us in the past. It's augmenting it with a different thinking. It's a both-and approach rather than an either-or approach. I mean, certainly I think we can all understand the physical limitations of a prescriptive approach to address all the permutations and combinations of things that can happen. You can't. You can't write it. The book would be hugely long and incredibly complex, and no one would read it, and then you'd be back to square one again. It has to actually, you put some guardrails around it with some prescriptive approach, then you try to augment it with, at some point, you just have to want to try to find the red herring and get it out of there. And it's going to be hard, and it's going to be unique to you, and it's going to be different. Okay. I think that that's going to be a big challenge. It's a bigger challenge than we think. We can deploy that at an industry level. We can deploy it at a company level. But it represents a significant cultural change that's not just a change in how we think about risk mitigation, you know, switching from a project kind of mindset to a process mindset, which is a big deal, and all the things that Dr. Rosenkind was going through. But it will require us to work together much more closely to evaluate performance and make choices as an industry on how to best make the next step and in how to set our priority plans so that we're all in that tent together. In summary, I think you can kind of see where we are here. I think that we do have to improve integrity management within HCAs. I think we do have to expand integrity management beyond HCAs. I think we have to be better proactive and explicit use of data. I think that's going to be a big deal. I think we're going to have to work more collaboratively together. I think it's going to take us an iterative approach that's about continuous improvement and opening up to a learning mindset, almost an aggressive kind of learning mindset. I think these management systems are really the framework that's going to ride on, and the working towards a safety culture is a big part of that. When we started this, I just want to close with a thought that's very powerful. How many of you are around safety programs, personnel safety programs? You have them, you're around them, you have them. How many of those programs say, it's really okay if 3 or 4 people die as long as our trend is better? No. Almost every one of those is zero. It's absolutely zero. What is common to those programs is basically a mindset about ownership. It's a mindset about continuous improvement. It's a mindset towards driving to continuously get ahead of this. You're seeing these other industries, and I think this industry is next, about taking that mindset, that approach from those personnel safety programs and applying it to your asset management program. With that, Rick?
Thanks. Okay, let's see if I can make this actually work for Larry. Let's see if we can get yours up here. Let's see. Got it. Larry Shelton. But that's not your.
That is mine. I just need to get on slideshow.
Bottom left.